So I've been thinking a bit lately about identities. I looked up identity in a dictionary, and one of the definitions I found was the distinguishing characteristics that make a person or thing what it is. And that's not exactly what I want to talk about. I'm talking more about the characteristics that we think make us what we are, more like um, the defining characteristics of the view I hold of myself. And it could be meaning my identity as that view, or my identities as the things that make up that view. And this can be very different. Sometimes that might be grounded in reality. It might be very diluted. Um, Also, two people might both be Americans, and to one person, that's a stronger part of their identity than another person. And sentient beings are deluded. So we're deluded in the sense that we see ourselves and other things as being inherently existent. So there's a part, even though I don't walk around thinking I'm inherently existent as part of my identity, that makes its way into every part of my identity. All the things I think make up my identity, it colors all of them. So I played around with different ways of looking at this topic for a while. First, I just kind of thought about what identities I hold, what identities I have held in the past, and how some of them have kind of slipped away and some of them have changed. And also how the identities I hold, how they affect how I think and act. And I tried to look at this through different ways of the Dharma, and I finally came to the conclusion I was going to try to present this and how it relates to the three principal aspects of the path, or the three principal realizations of the path. So the first principal aspect of the path is the determination for liberation, to be liberated from all suffering and unsatisfactoriness. The determination to be free of unsatisfactoriness and all the problems of it. And it seems like a lot of our identities can cause us a lot of problems, depending on how we hold them. So if someone says something and I'm offended, it could be helpful for me to stop and think, what identity am I holding that makes me offended? What identity is being challenged? And sometimes that can be very useful. And I think about I can see real closely that 4 of the 8 worldly concerns are very related to this. The praise or blame, good or bad reputation, they're very related to how we hold our identities. And the determination to be free is the determination to be free of the dukkha of samsara. And samsara is primarily our contaminated aggregates. And these aggregates are the basis on which we impute the self, the person. And then it seems that the identities we hold they're either imputed upon these aggregates also, or maybe they're imputed upon the person that's imputed upon the aggregates. I've been kind of thinking about that a little bit. But in any case, they're an integral part of the story I tell myself about who I am, how others should treat me, how the world should treat me, and how I should treat the world. And to develop a determination to be free of samsara, I need to let go of my grasping at these identities and the stories I spin around them. So in that way, this is very related to the first principal aspect of the path. So I'm a Buddhist monk, and I hold this identity, and there's nothing wrong with being a Buddhist monk and nothing wrong with holding this identity. I need to be aware of that identity because to be mindful of my precepts and behave in a way suiting for a Buddhist monastic. However, if I become attached to this identity, then if I come across someone who has something negative to say about Buddhists or monks, then I could become upset and easily upset and problem. Also, I could get puffed up thinking, oh, I'm a monastic, and then that's going to be leading to problems too. That's not very in line with being a monastic. So some identities are fine conventionally, but it's how we hold them that we really need to look at sometimes. And the second principal realization on the path is bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is based in great compassion, which we've heard a lot about recently and need to think about a lot. And great compassion has a very strong aspect of equanimity. It's not just wanting some sentient beings to be free of samsara, of dukkha. It's wanting all sentient beings to be free. And not just 7.9 billion sentient beings that are the humans on this planet, but all sentient beings. And a big part of what I've been reflecting on about the identities is how that they can be inclusive or exclusive. And I'll talk a little bit about, actually they can be both. An example of this is if I see myself as an American and I hold this as strongly as a main part of my identity, then it could make me feel more connected to the 333 million Americans out there. And in that way, it could be inclusive. But then it makes me part of a group that excludes 7.6 billion other humans and an infinite amount of sentient beings. So in that way, it would be exclusive. So you can see what I mean by exclusive and inclusive here. So basically, thinking about whether our identities that we hold make us feel more connected to others or less connected, or more connected to some and less connected to some. So here at the Abbey right now, I think we have 21 humans living here. Okay, so you see my nose? My nose is different than each and every one of the other 20 living here. But if we were going to pick 20 out of all the sentient beings living on this property, if we were going to pick 20 of them to have a nose like mine, it's not going to be the stink bugs or the cats. It's going to be the other 20 humans. So my point for saying this is that sometimes we focus on our differences when we have a lot of similarities, more similarities. In fact, if I were to pick 7.9 billion sentient beings on this planet that have a nose like mine, it's going to be all the humans. It's not going to be the chimps and the bonobos, not going to be the stink bugs. And yet still, especially with humans, we have this thing of these identities that divide very strongly. Now, if my strongest identity were thinking of myself as a sentient being, would that make me feel more connected to all sentient beings? And would that make it easier for me to develop some sense of equanimity towards all sentient beings? I'm not saying that that would be the only thing necessary for that, but I think it could help. The more exclusive an identity, the more it creates a sense of self and others, and becomes a source of this, a basis for such a dichotomy. So cultivating great compassion requires seeing others suffering and feeling connected to them in a way that we see them as lovable, and we see their suffering as unbearable. This is kind of like members of a close, loving family see each other. I grew up in a very close family. And great compassion leaves no sentient being out of the great family. And of course, we can cultivate compassion for beings that are not necessarily in a group we consider ourselves of. It's outside of the groups that we identify with, we can still have compassion for the beings outside those groups. I'm not saying we can't. It's a matter of how we hold those identities again. So I am an American, but I don't hold that as my strongest identity. Certainly not to the point of not caring about non-Americans. And I'm a man, but that doesn't mean I don't care about women and their concerns. I'm a human. That doesn't mean I don't care about animals and other non-humans. And it doesn't mean that I've always been an American, or always been a man, or always been a human. So the third principle, realization of the path, is the realization of wisdom, specifically the wisdom that sees the nature of reality. So everything, ourselves, other beings, the phenomena around us, and the identities we weave or create, they're all empty of inherent existence. They are empty and they are dependent arisings. They exist, but they do not exist inherently. So our identities and the things we base them on arise due to causes and conditions. They arise, they abide, if you can call it that, for the briefest moment, and they cease. And so even on a conventional level, there's very little stable base for these identities. But since beginningless time, how many times have I been born as a human? And how many times not? How many times have I been born as a man? How many times have I been born as a woman? Even in this current life, I see myself as middle-aged, and I have that as an identity, but it's kind of relatively new. And it won't be long before it's not a current status. Just as looking at myself now as young is no longer realistic. But it seems like my strongest identity is I, the sense of I, some sense of an inherently existent self. And ultimately, there is no self to be found, no self to defend or prop up, and nothing findable in the whole story I tell myself, about others, and about the world around us. So I've found it helpful to examine and contemplate some of my identities that I hold and how I hold them, and invite you to do the same.